At family dinner, my brother looked straight at me and said, "Mom and Dad said you never contribute anything to this family." For a moment, the clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation seemed to vanish. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, while his words landed like a slap. Everyone's eyes flicked toward me, waiting to see how I'd react. The betrayal wasn't whispered behind closed doors. It was served in front of relatives, on a night that was supposed to be about togetherness. My throat tightened, but I didn't argue. I've never been the one to fight for attention. That's never been me. My way of showing care has always been quieter. I'm the one who covers bills before the notices arrive, who drives Mom to her appointments, who fills the fridge when it's running empty. When the sink breaks, I call the plumber. When Dad forgets to take his medication, I'm the one who reminds him. These things don't make a scene, they don't sparkle in the spotlight, but they keep the household running. And yet, in that instant, none of it seemed to exist. My brother's words erased everything I had quietly carried on my shoulders. He spoke with such certainty, as if the sacrifices I've made were invisible, as if they had never happened at all. I sat there, cheeks burning, watching the family I've worked so hard to support treat me like dead weight. No one rushed to correct him, no one said otherwise. Silence wrapped around me, thicker than any argument could. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. The words still hung in the air, sharp enough to cut. I waited for anyone, to push back against what Caleb had thrown at me. Instead, I was met with nothing. My chest tightened as I glanced around the table, searching for a sign of defense. Marcia didn't hesitate. She tilted her head, lips pressed thin, then gave a small approving nod, as if her son had spoken nothing but truth. Gerald didn't even look up. He just kept chewing, eyes fixed on his plate, as though the conversation didn't involve him at all. Heat rushed to my face. It wasn't only their silence that burned me. It was who else was sitting there. My aunt leaned back in her chair, her eyebrows raised with that pitying expression I'd seen before, while my cousin smirked like he'd just witnessed a performance meant for entertainment. I wanted the ground to open beneath me. I forced myself to swallow down the knot in my throat. My hands trembled under the table, but I clenched them until my nails dug into my palms. If I said anything, it would only fuel Caleb further. He sat so smugly at the head of the conversation, basking in the approval he didn't even have to earn. That's when it hit me, clearer than ever. They would always see him differently. He could do no wrong, no matter how careless or cruel. The way their eyes softened for him, the way their silence protected him, the way his word was taken as fact, it all screamed what I had known my whole life. Caleb wasn't just their son. He was their prize. And me? I was nothing more than background noise at my own family's table. It wasn't the first time Caleb's words had cut me down, and deep inside I knew it wouldn't be the last. That night at the table just brought years of imbalance crashing to the surface, a pattern I had lived with since childhood. I remembered grade school, when Caleb brought home a B on a spelling test, and Mom clapped like he'd won a trophy. Dad ruffled his hair and called him a natural. I brought home straight A's that same week. My paper landed on the counter, barely noticed before it slid under a stack of junk mail. It stayed that way as we grew up. Caleb played soccer one season, scored a single goal, and suddenly there were balloons, banners, and phone calls to every relative. Meanwhile, I was working part-time in high school, covering my own books, saving for college. My effort blended into the background like it was expected, never celebrated. The unfairness became sharper as we got older. Caleb wanted to attend an expensive university, but couldn't afford tuition. I remember clocking in double shifts at the diner, my feet aching, just to help cover what scholarships and loans didn't. Nobody asked me to do it. I just knew if he didn't get that chance, I'd be the one blamed for holding him back. Yet when he graduated, every speech, every toast, every proud word from our parents placed him on a pedestal. My name wasn't mentioned once. Then came the loan. Our parents signed their names beside his without hesitation, even though he had a history of missing payments and maxing out cards. They never stopped to question it. When I later faced a hospital bill I couldn't manage alone, I thought maybe, just maybe, they would back me too. But the answer came quick and firm, no. Dad said it wasn't a good investment. Mom said I needed to be more independent. I was left staring at the same people who had bent over backward for Caleb, wondering why my needs never carried weight. All of these moments piled together, layering into years of quiet neglect. I had learned to swallow it, to carry on with my own life while Caleb basked in their admiration. But hearing him speak that sentence at dinner, loud enough for relatives to hear, wasn't just another slight. It was the loudest declaration yet of where I stood in this family. Invisible, unworthy, and unwanted. I drove home with the radio off, the quiet in my car pressing harder than any sound. Streetlights blurred past, but my head was locked on the dining room table, every second replaying itself like a cruel loop. Caleb's smirk. My aunt's raised brow. Mom's nod. Dad's silence. Each image weighed on me, but what burned most wasn't his remark. It was the way no one defended me. Not a word. Not even hesitation. When I pulled into my driveway, I just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel. I thought maybe the tears would come once I was alone, but they didn't. My eyes stayed dry. Instead, a coldness settled in my chest. I had spent years convincing myself that eventually they would see me, that my effort would speak for itself. Tonight proved otherwise. They never noticed before, and they never would. I walked into my house, dropped my bag on the chair, and let the silence follow me in. The sting of being dismissed overpowered even Caleb's jab. His cruelty was expected. What broke me was the echo of my parents' agreement. That silence was louder than any insult he could have thrown. I stood in the middle of my kitchen and whispered to myself, steady and clear. If they think I don't contribute, I'll stop contributing altogether. For years I had been the invisible support holding everything upright. I was the one slipping checks into the envelope, so their property stayed safe. I was the one covering prescriptions when Mom's health took a turn. I was the one stepping in when Caleb racked up late fees or let his bills spiral. Nobody asked me to. Nobody even knew the extent of what I was doing. I had just kept going, believing it mattered. But tonight changed that. No more quiet rescues. No more money disappearing from my account to patch holes in theirs. No more safety nets stretched under Caleb's recklessness. I felt the decision settle into me like stone, immovable and certain. They wanted to believe I brought nothing? Then they could live with what nothing really looked like. Starting now, the weight I'd been carrying was theirs to bear. The next morning, I woke with the same heaviness in my chest, but instead of sinking under it, I moved with purpose. My routine had always been automatic, logging into accounts, checking due dates, sending payments before late fees appeared. That cycle ended. I closed my laptop without clicking a single button. The reminders would come, but they wouldn't be mine to chase anymore. A week later, the envelope with property paperwork arrived. Normally, I would have opened it right away, called the office, and scheduled the payment before anyone else even realized it was due. This time, I left it sitting on the counter. I ran my finger across the seal once, then pushed it aside. Caleb wanted to boast about how much more valuable he was to the family. Let him take care of the land that made them so proud. The first real test came when Mom phoned late in the evening. Her voice carried that familiar edge of expectation as she mentioned running low on basics. For years, I had driven over without hesitation, bags in hand before she could even finish the list. But this time, I steadied myself and said, "Not this time." The silence on the other end lasted long enough for me to hear her breath hitch. Then she muttered something about asking Caleb. I hung up before the guilt could creep in. At first, they didn't notice the shift. Weeks went by, and life carried on as though nothing had changed. But then the small cracks started showing. Letters with red lettering appeared in their mailbox. Calls from offices grew more frequent. The comfortable cushion I had always maintained beneath them was gone, and the absence left them exposed. Caleb tried to step in, but he wasn't built for responsibility. Numbers and deadlines had never been his strength. Late fees stacked up. Fees turned into warnings. The weight that once landed squarely on my shoulders shifted onto his, and for the first time, I could see him squirm under it. I watched it all from a distance, quiet, steady, and deliberate. I didn't need to argue anymore. Every unpaid balance, every notice, every frustrated sigh from Mom was proof enough. The image of Caleb as the family's shining example began to crack, and all I had to do was nothing at all. It didn't take long for the cracks to widen. I started hearing bits of conversation through hushed phone calls, strained voices traveling down the line when they thought I wasn't listening. Bills had stacked higher than anyone expected. Caleb's frustration was leaking through in every word. He barked at Mom for calling him, snapped at Dad for reminding him of deadlines, and somewhere in the middle of it all, my name kept surfacing as the reason for their troubles. The next time we were all together, the tension clung to the room like smoke. Plates clattered louder than necessary. Chairs scraped harshly against the floor. Caleb's jaw was tight, his voice sharp, every sentence laced with irritation. He didn't aim his anger at himself, he never did. Instead, he threw it at me like darts, muttering about how I'd abandoned responsibilities that apparently were mine alone. Mom eventually joined in. Her patience, always thinner with me than with him, snapped. She turned toward me, her words cutting and deliberate. "You're being selfish." The air went still. A dozen responses rose in my throat, but I held them back, letting only one slip free. I leaned forward slightly, my tone calm, almost quiet, and asked, "What exactly have I ever contributed, Mom?" The question echoed, heavier than if I had shouted. Every person in the room stilled. Caleb's mouth clamped shut mid-sentence. My aunt looked down at her plate. Even Dad, who usually kept himself removed from these confrontations, froze, his fork hovering over his food. No one spoke. For once, their silence didn't erase me. It exposed them. They knew. Somewhere deep down, each of them was aware of the hours I'd given, the money I'd spent, the weight I'd carried without complaint. They had all leaned on me without acknowledging it, and now that I had pulled away, the emptiness revealed the truth. That stillness lingered longer than any argument could have. The faces around me shifted, some uncomfortable, some guilty, some simply blank. But no one dared to answer my question. And in that silence, I finally felt the balance of power begin to change. The unease that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over one evening when we all gathered again. Caleb had been carrying resentment for weeks, snapping in small bursts, but this time he couldn't hold it in. His voice rose above everyone else's, sharp and venomous, echoing off the walls. "You're lazy and bitter," he spat, pointing across the room at me. His words landed with the force of a hammer, his chest heaving as though he'd finally unburdened himself of a truth he'd been dying to say. Mom's face tightened, Dad shifted in his chair, but neither stepped in. Their silence only fed his fury. I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached into my bag, the one I'd carried in without explanation. My fingers found the folder I had prepared, a collection of papers I'd been saving for this very moment. I laid it on the table, flipping it open with deliberate calm. "Lazy," I said evenly, sliding the first sheet across. "Here's the confirmation for the utilities I kept current." Another page followed. This one, property records, paid in full in my name. I turned the next toward him. "And this? Proof I covered your car insurance when you couldn't make the payments." His face blanched, the bravado faltering as the documents piled up between us. I kept going. Each slip of paper hit the table with the weight of years unacknowledged. Receipts, bank statements, transaction records. Finally, I pulled out one last page and set it down with care. And this is where I helped Dad settle a credit card balance. A debt that would have ruined his score if it went unpaid. The room froze. The sound of paper shuffling was the only thing breaking the silence. Caleb's mouth opened, then closed again, no words coming out. Mom stared at the folder like it was something poisonous. Dad leaned back, his hands limp at his sides, eyes fixed on the proof staring back at him. The air had shifted. No accusations, no defenses. Just the undeniable weight of evidence spread across the table. Marcia's lips parted, but nothing came. Gerald looked down at his hands, unable to meet my gaze. The silence was no longer protective, it was suffocating. And in that silence, their excuses crumbled. The papers lay scattered across the table, a quiet storm that no one dared touch. My pulse beat steady in my ears, but my voice came out controlled. I looked at each of them, my parents first, then Caleb, and finally the relatives sitting off to the side. "You think this is about dollars?" I asked, my tone sharper than I expected. "It isn't. I could live without a cent of it back. What I can't live with is being erased, dismissed, treated like I've been nothing all these years." My words cut through the silence, hanging in the air heavier than Caleb's shouting had. Mom's eyes flickered, Dad rubbed his jaw, but neither spoke. Caleb opened his mouth, but I raised my hand, stopping him before he could twist it. "You always had your star," I said, turning toward my brother. "The one who could stumble and still be praised. The one who could drop every responsibility, yet still be called the pride of the family. He was the golden boy. And while everyone was busy polishing his shine, I was the one patching the cracks underneath, making sure this whole house didn't collapse." My throat tightened, but I didn't let it stop me. I wasn't asking for parades. I wasn't asking for gifts. All I ever wanted was a nod, a word, even the smallest sign that what I did mattered. Instead, I got nothing. Not once. I took a breath, then reached for the folder, sliding it shut with finality. If you want to believe I've done nothing, then fine. From here on out, Caleb can be your hero. The room seemed to shrink around us. Mom pressed her lips together. Dad finally lifted his gaze, but the weight in their eyes came too late. I rose from my chair slowly, steadying myself with the back of it, then turned toward the door. My footsteps carried me out, each one firmer than the last. Behind me, the silence wasn't just uncomfortable, it was suffocating, and I left it for them to drown in. The weeks that followed painted a picture I didn't need to see up close to understand. Word filtered back through relatives, through strained phone calls that grew shorter each time. Without me silently propping them up, the cracks widened faster than anyone anticipated. The property bill arrived first. With no one stepping in to cover it, deadlines slipped past. Late fees stacked one after another until my parents had no choice but to reach into funds they had sworn never to touch. The cushion they once relied on started thinning, and the comfort they had taken for granted bled away with every withdrawal. Caleb, who had always managed to live beyond his means, found the pressure unbearable. His apartment, the one he flaunted as proof of his independence, became another weight he couldn't carry. Rent piled up, notices slipped under his door, and eventually, the keys were forced back into the landlord's hands. The pride he once wore so boldly was replaced with excuses and bitterness. Inside my parents' home, the strain grew louder than ever. Arguments broke out in the kitchen, in the hallway, over the phone. Gerald pointed a finger at Caleb, accusing him of carelessness. Marcia defended her son at first, but even her voice cracked under the weight of reality. Every fight circled back to the same truth. The safety net was gone, and the person they had leaned on without acknowledgement wasn't there to catch them anymore. While their world rattled, mine settled into something steadier. I poured my time into work, into projects I had once pushed aside while running errands for them. My days were quieter, my evenings lighter. I discovered what it felt like to have energy left for myself instead of giving every ounce away. Peace came not with grand gestures, but with the absence of constant demands. I found space to breathe, to grow, to focus on goals that had long been waiting for me. And as their arguments carried through the grapevine and Caleb's downfall became common knowledge, I realized something important. I didn't have to lift a finger. Their collapse spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. Months passed before my phone finally lit up with their names. The calls came hesitantly at first, spaced far apart, as though they weren't sure if I would even answer. When I finally picked up, the voices on the other end carried a weight I had never heard before. Gone was the usual tone of authority, replaced with something softer, almost fragile. They admitted what they had never said aloud. They told me they hadn't understood the extent of what I had done, that the house, the comfort, the stability, they had all rested on my shoulders in ways they'd chosen not to see. Their words stumbled, awkward and clumsy, but the meaning was clear. They were humbled. Yet one person's silence remained unchanged. Caleb's name came up only in fragments, usually when my mother sighed or my father let his voice trail off. He hadn't spoken to me directly, not once. And though no one said it outright, I knew the truth. His failures were plain now, visible even to them. The apartment gone, the unpaid balances, the broken promises. His pedestal had cracked, and he had nothing left to stand on. As they spoke, I kept my voice level, my responses measured. I didn't lash out, didn't raise my volume, didn't unleash the anger I once carried. Instead, I let the conversation flow with a kind of distant courtesy, polite enough to keep the line open but cold enough to remind them that the gap between us remained. I wasn't in a hurry to run back, and I wasn't desperate to be embraced again. The power had shifted, and I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Their acknowledgement came late, after years of blindness, and while it mattered in some small way, it no longer defined me. I had built a life beyond them, one that didn't depend on their approval. Sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling or fighting. It's stepping back and letting people drown in the silence of what they once took for granted. Do you think I was right to walk away, or should I have given them another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more stories like this.